Most people quit weed expecting their brain to switch back on. It doesn't, and the reason why reveals something unexpected about how the brain actually works. Stopping cannabis doesn't feel like flipping a switch. For many people, the first phase feels strangely worse. Sleep shifts, emotions sharpen, motivation goes flat, and the mind feels more restless than it did before. That's not failure. That's not weakness. That's the brain remembering how to run on its own. Understanding what actually happens inside the brain after quitting weed reveals something deeper about how the nervous system handles long-term stimulation, emotional regulation, and reward, and why recovery often feels confusing before it starts feeling clear. So what exactly was THC doing inside the brain all this time? THC interacts directly with the endocannabinoid system, a regulatory network involved in mood, stress response, memory, appetite, sleep, and emotional signaling. The brain naturally produces its own cannabinoid-like chemicals, called endocannabinoids. Their job? Stabilize communication between neurons and maintain internal balance. THC mimics those signals, but unlike the brain's natural version, which is tightly regulated and short-lived, THC produces a stronger, longer-lasting effect. Over time, the brain adapts. Cannabinoid receptors become less sensitive. Natural signaling reorganizes around the presence of THC. So when someone quits, the brain isn't simply losing a habit. It's suddenly operating without a signal. It quietly restructured itself around. But this is where most people get caught off guard. If quitting is supposed to help the brain recover, why does it initially feel harder? Because the nervous system is temporarily dysregulated. After repeated THC exposure, the brain's own endocannabinoid activity can temporarily operate below its previous baseline. That system regulates mood, stress, sleep, appetite, and emotional stability. So when it's off, multiple systems feel off simultaneously. This is why early withdrawal can include irritability, anxiety, restlessness, vivid dreams, appetite changes, and emotional sensitivity. The discomfort isn't damage. It's the nervous system recalibrating after depending on a signal that suddenly disappeared. And here's one of the most disorienting parts for many people. Why do dreams suddenly become so vivid and so exhausting right after quitting? THC can suppress REM sleep in many users, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming and emotional memory processing. When cannabis use stops, the brain experiences REM rebound. REM activity surges, dreams become longer, more emotionally intense, harder to shake in the morning. For some people, this lasts days. For others, several weeks. The dreams weren't new. They were being muted the whole time, and the brain is finally letting them through. But what about the motivation problem? Why do some people feel mentally hollow after quitting, even when quitting was something they genuinely wanted? THC indirectly affects dopamine signaling, specifically around reward anticipation and emotional reinforcement. Over time, repeated stimulation changes how rewarding ordinary experiences feel. Fast, predictable stimulation becomes easier to access than slower rewards, tied to effort, patience, or long-term goals. When THC is removed, the dopamine system doesn't instantly normalize. Music feels less engaging, motivation drops, boredom feels louder, ordinary activities feel emotionally muted. The brain hasn't forgotten how to feel reward. It's temporarily relearning how to generate it without the shortcut. And this is where it becomes deeply personal for many people. Cannabis often acts as an emotional dampener, not by removing emotions, but by softening intensity, slowing reactivity, and creating psychological distance from stress. When that buffer disappears, emotions feel exposed, stress feels sharper, embarrassment lingers longer, frustration feels amplified. Even quiet moments can carry emotional weight that wasn't there before. This happens because the nervous system is processing emotional input without the same chemical buffering it adapted to. Quitting weed doesn't create emotions. It reveals emotions. The brain had become used to filtering differently. So what actually changes as the brain begins stabilizing again? Over time, cannabinoid receptor sensitivity begins recovering. Natural endocannabinoid signaling starts regulating more efficiently. Sleep architecture improves. REM cycles stabilize. Baseline dopamine signaling becomes more balanced. Short-term memory and attention frequently improve. Emotional regulation becomes less chemically dependent. And the most commonly reported shift isn't euphoria, it's clarity. People describe clearer mornings, more emotional consistency, better memory, more stable motivation, and a stronger sense of presence. The brain isn't becoming better than before. It's returning to regulation that no longer depends on external input to stay stable. But this is what catches almost everyone off guard. Recovery rarely feels steady. Some days feel completely normal. Then suddenly, a craving appears. Sleep gets disrupted. Emotions spike, or motivation drops for no clear reason. That inconsistency is neurochemical recalibration. Different systems recover at different speeds. Sleep may improve before motivation does. Mood may stabilize before cravings fully fade. Stress tolerance may fluctuate while receptor sensitivity is still adjusting. Recovery feels uneven because the nervous system rebuilds balance in layers, not all at once. The deeper insight here isn't just about cannabis. It's about how adaptable the human brain actually is. The nervous system constantly adjusts itself around repeated inputs: stress, stimulation, sleep patterns, emotional coping habits, substances. The brain adapts to all of them. That adaptation is not weakness, it's survival. But adaptation has a cost. The longer something becomes part of regulation, the harder it becomes to notice what changed underneath. This is why quitting can feel emotionally confusing. The brain isn't only removing THC, it's relearning how to regulate stress, reward, sleep, and emotion without the shortcut it quietly built itself around. And biological recalibration is always slower than conscious intention. What happens to the brain after quitting weed isn't instant clarity. At first, the nervous system often becomes temporarily dysregulated. Sleep changes, dreams intensify, motivation fluctuates, emotions feel sharper. But underneath that instability, the brain is doing something important, restoring its own natural regulation systems. Receptor sensitivity recovers. Sleep architecture reorganizes. Reward pathways rebalance. Gradually, the nervous system becomes less dependent on artificial stimulation to maintain baseline. Not because the brain was broken, because it adapted. The hardest part of quitting weed isn't the withdrawal. It's the in-between the period where the brain already knows something changed, but hasn't finished remembering what normal feels like.